This collar design is the Mandarin Collar. If you're using the 5th edition of the book, this is on page 192. We're still in chapter 10. It does show you a graphic of 3 different Mandarin Collar variations. I will show you how to do the basic one, and then if you want to do one of the variations as pictured, that's up to you. So the first thing you'll need also for this collar are your front and back neck measurements. So I'm just going to go over that. Again, you'll need your measuring tape. And I am measuring from the paper draft of my slopers. And make sure you're measuring for the back, the neckline for the sloper without the shoulder dart. So just the one dart left. So I'm measuring from shoulder to center back. And I'm measuring 4 inches actually. And for the front, I'm measuring 4 1/8. So combined, that would be 8 1/8. Okay, so my first step, I'm going to cut a piece of paper. This piece of paper is about 18 by 10 inches. There's only one piece to the collar, so this should be more than what we need to draft this. So first step is square a line in the center of the paper equal to the following measurements. So A to B is 1 1/2 inches, which will be your collar stand. So the height of your collar. So again, I am going to use my crosses here. Let's come over here. Make sure I have enough room. And again, we're going to draft to the right of this A to B line. And I'm going to just make a right angle because I need to have, it says square line, so I'm making a right angle here. And I'm going to use my clear ruler to measure from point B, my 1 1/2 inches up. Make a tick mark, and this is A. Okay, so B to C is the total back and front neck. So on this line here that I'm going to extend, line B, making sure I match my right angle up again so my line is not crooked. That should be 8 1/8. And I'm going to place a tick mark here, and then this is C. That is my center front. I'm just going to label it. And B to D is center back to shoulder measurement. And I'm going to mark that for a center notch. So my center back to shoulder was 4 inches. If your measurements are different than mine, don't be alarmed. Because that has to do with the curves that you actually drew in your neckline. So this is D. That's my notch. Don't need to label it. I'm just labeling it for our purposes. And I'm going to draw a notch here, which is going to look like a tiny T here, because that will need to be marked on my pattern piece for sewing purposes. Okay, so I'm going to square up a 1/2 inch from C. So anytime it tells you to square up, you're going to use your L square. And 1/2 inch from C. So 1/2 inch, I'm going to use my clear ruler. That's 4 blocks. And I'm going to put a tick mark here. And I'm going to label that E. I'm going to draw a curved line from E to D, completing the neckline edge. So I am going to use the hip curve here. So I have a slightly less curved line. And again, I'm going to start sliding the straightest part of the ruler at B until my curve hits E. And I'm going to blend into D. Okay. I'm going to square a 1.5 inch line at a right angle to ED and label it F. So this is a little tricky because you're squaring a line and it is at an angle. So I'm going to actually put my L square here. So I'm lining up my corner point of my L square here at E. This is going to hit D. And I'm drawing my right angle here, and that should be, I can erase the rest of this guideline. And that should be 1.5 inches. And that's F. Draw a line from A to F that's parallel with the BDE line. So just like we put our seam allowance on, we're going to draw a line from A to F. So this is 1.5 inches. So where my line is straight here, I can go ahead and just draw a straight line. Where my line starts to leave my ruler, I'm going to pivot and place that 1.5 inch line there and just continue to draw, and then I can go in and true it with my curve up top. Until I hit F. Okay, so I'm going to go in and just true this. Clean up my lines a little bit. Okay, so next I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to deviate from the instructions just a tiny bit because we're going to place this on the fold. So I'm going to go ahead and put my fold bracket at the back and my grain lines on. So again, I'm coming in at 1 inch and I'm going to put a straight grain line here. I'm going to do a cross grain, so I'm going to line this up perpendicular with my center back edge. And remember that collars you can cut on any grain. So I like to put all 3 grain lines on the collar. So I'm gonna line this up here. Now this collar's so small, I'm gonna mark outside of my collar here for the bias grain, and then go in and just connect the dots. So I'm gonna lightly draw here. So this is my bias grain line. Okay, I'm gonna label my center back edge, which is here. And I also need to put a fold bracket on, which I'm gonna do at 1/2 inch. Or you can do it at 1/4 as long as it's perpendicular. Or I'm sorry, parallel. And point to the edge. So the center back edge that's gonna be placed on the fold. Okay, so this is my Mandarin collar. And this collar would be self-faced, so I would cut 2. So this is self 2 of your main fabric over my size, which is 8, and then I would cut 1 in interfacing for the undercollar. Okay, so the next thing I need to do, and if it helps, you can erase these guidelines so that you can just see the collar. So I can erase that D to C line because D to E curve is the actual collar. And I'm gonna go ahead and put my seam allowance on instead of transferring to another paper, so we can save a little bit of paper here. Please go in and make sure that your notch is visible, and this will get 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way around except on the edge that will be placed on the fold. So remember, with your clear ruler, 1/4 inch is 2 blocks. And I'm gonna line up my 1/4 inch line with my stitching line. And when the line starts to change, just pivot the ruler. If you are wanting to do a variation of this Mandarin collar, I'll show you how to use your hip curve, or you can actually use your French curve. The hip curve is probably best if you want a curved line at the center front. And you would want to do that before you put your seam allowance lines on. So I'm going to just go in and clean this up and get rid of my guidelines here. And this will be ready to cut out. Make sure I've closed all of the edges of my pattern pieces. So I need to close this here. And if I wanted to do what we usually see is like a traditional Mandarin collar, I can go in and draw a curved edge here. And so then my seam allowance line would just follow that curve. But for right now, I'm going to just keep mine as the basic Mandarin collar.